In the winter of 1998 in Korea, in a city, there were a series of cases involving a man wearing a red hat. He followed, violated, and murdered female victims. Under the freezing cold of the winter night, the police were still persistently guarding near a small alley. Several male police officers disguised as women were constantly walking around. They were so cold that they could not walk anymore. They urged the captain to quickly return. Compared to the cold outside, the inside of the car was not much better. A police officer complained all night. Finally, they waited for the captain's notice to end their shift, but police officer Hayong did not want to go home. No matter how cold it was, it could not shake Hayong's determination, because Hayong was determined to catch the criminal at all costs. Hayong could not let the remorse follow her like in the past. More than 20 years ago, Hayong and her mother went boating in the park. Unexpectedly, two boats were rushing towards them at a terrifying speed nearby. Just like that, Hayong almost fell into the water. When the boy slowly sank, he saw a girl in a red shirt floating in the water. Her eyes were wide open with a pale face. It was clear that she had been in the water for a long time. The police quickly went to the park to retrieve the body. Hayong saw the woman die tragically and was extremely sorry. Hayong ran over and covered the body's legs with a white cloth. At this time, Hayong's mother ran over and picked Hayong up. When Hayong looked towards the people who were watching, the boy discovered a suspicious man. That person was turning around and leaving. Hayong did not understand why the murderer had to be so cruel to that girl. This question has always haunted Hayong for decades, so now he became a police officer. Because Hayong did not want another victim to die unjustly like that girl. Back to the present, because his teammates did not want to suffer with Hayong, they quickly left the scene of the guard. After his teammates had all left, Hayong got out of the car and began patrolling in a small alley. When Hayong passed a turn, he saw a man in a red hat trying to climb into the window to enter the room. Hayong immediately shouted to stop him. Immediately after, the two people chased and fought fiercely in the alley. Finally, Hayong successfully captured the man. After the suspect was brought to the police station, Hayong discovered that he was just a copycat of the man in the red hat. This person had several criminal records. Hayong did not understand why there were people who worshipped a brutal man like the man in the red hat. Not only that, that person was not afraid of breaking the law, but also imitated the man in the red hat. At this time, the captain passed by and said that the police were already tired just by arresting criminals, so Hayong did not need to waste his energy to find out why the murderer committed the crime. However, Hayong could not let go of this obsession because this was a question that had been with him since he was a child. Today, it was raining heavily. Pregnant woman, Wang Yon, had just finished her health check. When Wang Yon was on her way home from the hospital, she felt that someone was following her, but Wang Yon could not see the person's figure clearly, so she comforted herself that perhaps she was too suspicious. When Wang Yon arrived at the door of her house, she saw her mother bringing kimchi to her. However, Wang Yon's mother did not stay long and quickly returned. When she left, her mother reminded Wang Yon to remember to lock the door carefully. Wang Yon went into the house to take a shower and change clothes. While Wang Yon was cooking noodles, she suddenly heard a noise in the living room. It was clear that someone had just entered the house. Wang Yon cautiously went to check and found that the person who entered the house was her boyfriend, Do Jin. Not only did Do Jin appear quietly, he also hurriedly wiped up the water on the floor. Do Jin went to the kitchen and drank a sip of Wang Yon's tea. Because she was pregnant, Wang Yon really hoped that her boyfriend could spend more time with her. However, Do Jin refused because he was busy with work at the pub. Do Jin really didn't have any free time. Wang Yon was not satisfied with this reason. She couldn't hold it in anymore and accidentally said that just because of a pub, he was cold to her again and again. Unexpectedly, that statement made Do Jin angry. Do Jin's face darkened and he began to question his girlfriend. Do Jin thought that Wang Yon looked down on his career, so the two had an argument. Do Jin angrily strangled Wang Yon until she fainted. The case was discovered a few days later. The police quickly issued an announcement. Surprisingly, when Wang Yon's body was discovered, the crime scene also clearly showed that this was a case of breaking into a house and assaulting and murdering. This method was the murder method of the man in the red hat. The police went to Wang Yon's house to investigate. Hayong discovered that the door lock had signs of being broken. Because Wang Yon's mother was an important witness, she had to be interrogated. However, because the mother was so heartbroken, she had to be hospitalized. Hayong went to the hospital to visit Wang Yon's mother, but he didn't know what he could do for her at the moment. Hayong could only pull the blanket over her legs. This action was like the compassion that had arisen from Hayong's childhood. At this time at the police station, police officer Min Soo was promoting the establishment of a scientific investigation team and a department specializing in criminal psychology research. research. However, police officer Min-soo encountered opposition from everyone, including those in power in the police department. They rejected this new method of investigation. Therefore, Min-soo felt extremely difficult. Meanwhile, the police were conducting an autopsy on Hwang Yun. The forensic pathologist speculated that Hwang Yun's time of death was around 11:30 at night. If we look at the time, except for Hwang Yun's mother, the time Do-jin arrived at the house was very coincidental. It is noteworthy that although Hwang Yun's body was naked, she was not violated. This was different from the murder method of the man in the red hat. The police then immediately went to arrest Do-jin. However, when Do-jin knew of Hwang Yun's death, he was extremely surprised. Do-jin said that after arguing with Hwang Yun that night, he did not go to work but went to the river to relieve his sadness. The captain in charge of the interrogation did not believe it at all. He also suspected that Do-jin was the man in the red hat because Do-jin also had a criminal record and was a gangster before. According to the witness, that night there was a man in the red hat who always followed Hwang Yun. This witness was the shop owner on Hwang Yun's way home. Next, Hayong went to the witness. Hayong asked about the physical characteristics of the man in the red hat. The owner said that he was not tall but small like a girl. After that, Hayong still ran everywhere to investigate and collect evidence. Hayong did not want to believe that Do-jin was the culprit in a one-sided way, because arbitrarily convicting would be very unfair to innocent people. When Hayong returned to the police station, he saw the captain beating Do-jin to force him to confess. Seeing this, Hayong immediately rushed to stop him. Unexpectedly, the captain was not satisfied with Hayong's attitude. For the captain, people with criminal records like Do-jin are all bad people. They don't know how to repent and have no mercy. Therefore, only fists are the best way to deal with these people. At the same time, the captain knows that Hayong and Do-jin are high school classmates, but Hayong doesn't cover up for Do-jin because of that. Because before there is solid evidence, Hayong will not arbitrarily convict anyone. However, the captain is determined to deal with Do-jin. The captain even puts Do-jin in the same category as the red hat. At this point, there is not much time left for Do-jin to respond. Therefore, Hayong immediately goes out to buy time to find evidence. Hayong continues to ask the people around. Hayong discovers that before the incident, this area was often robbed. When Hayong was asking a resident who had lost something, he discovered a series of numbers on her door lock. She also did not know who left that series of numbers. So Hayong decided to start searching from the theft case. Hayong looked through the records of the theft. Hayong discovered that the owners of the houses that were robbed were all women. The amount of money stolen was also very small. This was like studying the terrain. The perpetrator preferred to find women to attack rather than rob property. Hayong recorded the families that were robbed. He noticed that the members of each family that was robbed were all women. They were women living alone or single mothers with small children. In addition, on the wall at the door of their house, there was a series of numbers made up of 2 and 3. Hayong continued to investigate. He discovered that many doors also had these numbers. Through investigating each house, Hayong finally understood the special way the perpetrator used to mark. Number 2 represents women, number 3 represents children, and number 1 represents men. The killer left these numbers as a reminder of the status of each family member. While committing the crime, the killer would choose houses without men. So who is the killer that he has the ability to track the number of members in each family? The killer also left the number on the door without anyone suspecting. At this time, a food delivery motorbike sped past. This situation gave Hayong a strong feeling. Hayong decided to return to the police station. Then he investigated the nearby restaurants that regularly delivered food. But when Hayong's investigation had not yet had results, Do-jin was pressured too much by the captain, so he confessed. At the same time, the police station arrested a man wearing a red hat. He was the perpetrator of many robberies in the area. However, because the case was not too serious, he was only sentenced to a few days of detention. When the man in the red hat saw Do-jin being forced to convict, he suddenly revealed a strange smile and said, "It wasn't him." Hayong's conscience also told him that this was not the real truth. While Do-jin had not been brought to trial, Hayong decided to take advantage of it one more time. This time, Hayong called Min-soo for help. Min-soo brought investigation equipment to meet Hayong. Then they went to Hwang Yun's house together to collect evidence. Finally, they discovered a fingerprint in the wardrobe. However, this fingerprint had no identification record, so Hayong's efforts still did not bring any results. Hayong's actions of causing more trouble made the captain extremely angry. The captain scolded Hayong, saying that a police officer like Hayong would not be welcomed anywhere. However, Min-soo felt that Hayong was very suitable for the field of science that Min-soo wanted to build. Hayong's reasoning and acumen were like a master of criminal psychology analysis. However, this field was also completely new new to Hayong. Minsu gave Hayong a book introducing criminal psychology. Minsu advised Hayong to study it carefully. In the end, Hayong still could not give a verdict for Do-jin. Hayong could only watch Do-jin be turned into a real murderer by the captain. In the end, Do-jin was sent to prison. This case became a torment in Hayong's heart. It made him always live with a feeling of guilt and remorse. Hayong put the case file in the drawer. He still waited for the opportunity to clear Do-jin's name. However, very quickly after that, the captain realized that his decision was wrong. Because a year later, the man in the red hat continued to commit the crime. He used the same method to murder a girl. Hayong started to visit the red hat thief often, but he always refused to meet Hayong. However, Hayong was still patient. He even used money to bribe the thief. Thanks to that, the thief agreed to meet Hayong. Hayong only had one doubt. When at the police station, why did the thief say Do-jin was not the real culprit? The thief replied that it was the intuition between the same kind. The thief felt that the boyfriend and Hwang Yun were lovers. If Do-jin got angry and accidentally killed his girlfriend, then he did not need to take off her clothes. After all, the two were lovers, so Do-jin would not trample on his girlfriend's dignity. Therefore, the person who did so could only be the criminal who sneaked into the room and assaulted the woman. He wanted to maintain his style, so he took off Hwang Yun's clothes. Through the conversation with the thief, Hayong became more convinced of Do-jin's innocence. After Hayong returned to the police station, he immediately wanted to reopen Do-jin's case, but the captain refused because he didn't want to lose face. The captain watched Hayong's back as he left. The captain loudly warned Hayong not to cause trouble for the police station. Hayong continued to the nearest victim's house. This time, Hayong discovered that there was no number on the wall at the door. According to the rules, Hayong went to ask the police in the area. Hayong knew that the police had recently increased patrols in this area, and they were targeting a suspicious thug. What was noteworthy was that this thug also liked to wear a red hat. Hayong went to find the thug, but Hayong realized that the thug was very different from the shop owner's testimony. The shop owner said that the man in the red hat was quite small. He looked like a girl, but this thug was 1.80 meters tall. At this time, Hayong saw another thug wearing a green hat. At that time, he was exploiting students. His stature was extremely short, no different from a student. Hayong decided to visit the thief. Hayong discussed with the thief about the recent victim's case. This time, the victim was still stripped of all her clothes, but not violated. This case was different from Hwang Yun's case because the perpetrator did not leave any numbers on the door. After listening, the thief immediately realized that this time when committing the crime, the perpetrator was extremely confident, so he did not leave any symbols on the wall. The thief's words immediately gave Hayong a hunch. Hayong decided to investigate since the suspect had a criminal record. The thief also agreed with Hayong's decision. Hayong intended to leave after speaking, but the thief still did not feel satisfied. The thief seemed to enjoy discussing criminal psychology with Hayong because finally someone understood him. After Hayong returned to the police station, he was scolded by the captain. It turned out that because Hayong kept coming to the thief for help, he was extremely arrogant and boasted everywhere. This made the captain feel humiliated. Hayong's actions had completely destroyed the police's reputation. Not only that, the others also doubted the captain's previous decision. Unexpectedly, Hayong argued that only criminals understood the psychology of criminals best. Hayong wanted to use that thief to catch the real man in the red hat. According to the thief, Hayong should look up the list of suspects with a history of robbery and assault. Then he screened out those who had worked at the food store. Next, Hayong and his partner Kang-ho began to investigate. However, most of these people were very aggressive and did not want to cooperate. That whole day, Hayong and Kang-ho had a hard time. The two of them were so tired that they were drenched in sweat, but they still couldn't get any useful information. In his helplessness, Hayong had no choice but to go to the thief. Hayong told the thief about the difficult situation during this period. However, the thief had started to be arrogant. The thief made all kinds of unreasonable demands to Hayong. Of course, Hayong didn't want to be threatened, so he stood up and left. Only then did the thief realize that Hayong was not someone who would compromise easily. The thief quickly said that although he didn't know more details, he thought that this criminal was addicted to the pleasure of killing. If the police didn't stop the murderer quickly, there would definitely be more victims. That day, a man brought a teenager to the police station. He said that this teenager intended to use scissors to pick the lock and sneak into his house. If the man was not at home, his pregnant wife would most likely be in trouble. This teenager was short. His build matched the witness's testimony. Moreover, the marks on his hair showed that he always had the habit of wearing a hat. Using scissors to pick the lock also matched the method of a series of cases of sneaking into houses, so Hayong considered this teenager a suspect. Hayong then began to interrogate him in the room. Although this teenager was young, he had already become a thief with many criminal records. Kang Ho followed Hayong's instructions and found the blue hat that the teenager had dropped on the side of the road. At the same time, Hayong also took the fingerprints on the scissors for testing. At this time, Hayong discovered that the number that this teenager wrote was exactly the same as the number on the wall. Hayong immediately placed the photo of the numbers in front of him. When he saw these photos, he was clearly nervous. Hayong continued to take out the victim's photos. Under Hayong's provocation, the teenager finally couldn't stand his interrogating gaze. At this point, his mentality had completely collapsed, and he admitted that he was the murderer who killed Huang Yun and the recently deceased. The reason the teenager took off the victim's clothes was because when he was young, he often witnessed his father taking off his mother's clothes to beat him. That night, the teenager followed Huang Yun home. The murderer hid in the wardrobe before Do-jin returned. That day, although Do-jin was very angry, he did not attack Huang Yun. After Do-jin left, the murderer appeared and strangled Huang Yun to death. When Hayong came out of the interrogation room with the confession, the captain's face was extremely ugly. Do-jin, who had been imprisoned for a year, finally received a notice of appeal. The next day, the police had the results of comparing the fingerprints on the scissors and in Huang Yun's wardrobe. Both fingerprints belonged to that teenager. Finally, the truth of the case was revealed. This reversal of the case caused a huge stir in society. After the case was over, Hayong and Min-soo made an appointment to go out for a drink to discuss the details of solving the case. Although Hayong was more careful and meticulous than other police officers, there were still many similar details in the two cases. They were not noticed by the police. For example, after the murderer killed the victim, he used toilet paper to wipe away all fingerprints and traces. Therefore, after the crime occurred, the rolls of paper in the two victims' houses were left with only the core. After hearing this, Min-soo immediately said that that was why he had repeatedly proposed the establishment of a criminal behavior analysis team. This not only improves the efficiency of solving cases, but it is also beneficial for keeping documents of criminal behavior so that it can be referenced in related cases later. Min-soo's words are very reasonable. Before returning home, Hayong thought about the psychological shadow of the thief and the teenager. It was both left by their parents since they were young. Therefore, although the teenager was a murderer, he was not born bad as the captain said. He had gone through many psychological shocks before becoming as corrupt as he is now. Along with the arrest of the murderer, news of Do-jin's wrongful imprisonment also began to be reported by the media. This news pointed directly at the police station. At the gate of the police station, a large number of protesters appeared. They protested against the police, using force to force suspects to confess. The phone in the police station was almost blown up. This even affected the director of the general department. The people strongly demanded his resignation to take the blame. That day, a reporter came to the police station who specifically wanted to interview Hayong. It turned out that the reporter had heard that this reflection was because Hayong asked for the opinion of a thief in prison, thanks to which the case was solved. But Hayong was not present at the police station at that time. In order to divert the public's attention from the police station using force to handle the case, the captain took the initiative to tell the reporter that Hayong had asked for help from the thief. The captain also deliberately revealed that Hayong had used money to bribe the thief. Sure enough, this truth overshadowed Do-jin's wrongful conviction. The society began to discuss how Hayong ignored the reputation of the police station and asked for the opinion of a criminal. What was Hayong's purpose? Therefore, Hayong became the one to take responsibility. Min-soo called Hayong to ask if he was okay. But Min-soo was also reassured because Hayong was not psychologically affected and he was always focused on finding the truth. This was the ideal criminal behavior analysis master that Min-soo needed. Along with the wave of public opinion, Min-soo once again told his seniors about establishing a scientific investigation team. 20 years ago, the US FBI had already started implementing this project. The seniors were also scared by this wrongful conviction, so they firmly asked the director to let Min-soo establish a criminal behavior analysis team to legitimize Hayong's actions of asking criminals for help. Thanks to that, the criminal behavior analysis team was established very quickly. Min-soo immediately invited Hayong to join, but Hayong still doesn't understand what criminal behavior analysis is. Min-soo explains that it's just the work that Hayong has been doing lately, so Hayong doesn't need to worry. From now on, Hayong just needs to continue investigating in his own way. When the problems were resolved, Hayong went to Do-jin's restaurant to chat. There were a few customers eating there. Hayong finished eating and was about to pay when Do-jin said he wanted to have a meal to thank Hayong. Hayong has always been like that. On the outside, Hayong seems indifferent to the people around him, but in fact, he always gives his all for them. This is Hayong's true self. One day, in a bustling park, a man bought a girl an ice cream and then tricked her into going home. On a gloomy, rainy night, the little girl's scream suddenly came from the man's house. The girl's parents immediately went to the police station to report the case. They kept asking about the police's search results. The girl's parents were extremely worried, but the police only reassured them that she might have accidentally gotten lost. The police were still unaware of the seriousness of the matter. That day, the criminal behavior analysis team had a third member. It was a young man named Woo Do. On the first day Woo Do came to meet them, he met Min Soo and Hayong going out. The two were in a hurry, so they couldn't entertain Woo Do, so Woo Do could only wait in the team's office. Today, Min Soo and Hayong went to the prison to talk to a criminal. Hayong planned to create a list of psychological errors in criminals, and then he recorded all the psychological activities that could appear in them. The person being interviewed was a criminal who had murdered and dismembered people. After the criminal heard Hayong's request, the criminal was somewhat surprised because no police officer had ever done this before. But under Hayong's guidance, the criminal gradually remembered the fall of the person that year. He revealed a crazy face, but he still refused to reveal the reason for the murder. He suggested ending today's conversation. If Hayong and Min Soo really wanted to know the criminal's thoughts, they should be patient and find him. After the day's work was over, Hayong and Min Soo tiredly went to the bathroom to soak. Only then did they remember Woo Do. At this time, Woo Do was abandoned in the office. Min Soo hurriedly called the office. Woo Do was sitting on the chair sleeping and suddenly woke up. Woo Do immediately regained his composure and picked up the phone. Min Soo felt extremely guilty. Min Soo told Woo Do to go home and rest first. Early the next morning, an old woman who picked up scrap metal went to a garbage dump. She opened each garbage bag, but when she opened the black bags, the old woman discovered a very scary scene. Inside the black bags were all the body parts of the human body. The police immediately started searching around. Finally, they found all the body parts. Through the examination, the police determined that the dead person was the missing girl. This case caused a huge shock in society. Who would be so cruel to a 5-year-old girl? Next, Min Soo asked her superiors to let her go to jail to talk to the criminal again. Because the head of the department could not stand the constant harassment, he agreed and would help Min Soo. The next day was Woo Do's day to work, but Woo Do found that there was no place for him in the office, so he had no choice but to move the desk over. Hayong was curious about Woo Do coming to this department, so Hayong asked Woo Do a little. Unexpectedly, Woo Do answered that he came here to work because the criminal behavior analysis team sounded cool. This answer left Hayong speechless. Hayong told Woo Do that this job was laborious and did not bring any benefits to himself. Their work was like a blind person lighting a lamp in the night. It was not beneficial to himself, but only illuminated others. Therefore, if Woo Do could not devote himself to that job, he would soon get bored and give up. This time, the criminal behavior analysis team was also very interested in the case of the murdered girl. Min Soo went to the head of the department. He wanted to ask for more documents of the case from the criminal department, but currently the criminal department was extremely busy. No one wanted to pay attention to Min Soo. Therefore, Hayong and Min Soo had no choice but to personally go to Tae-gu, the team leader who was in charge of the girl's case. In front of Tae-gu, the two people proactively presented their judgment. They believed that the murderer was not a mentally ill person, as reported by the media. He must have had another reason for killing people. However, Tae-gu did not accept Hayong's words. She also thought that the two people were creating more trouble for her. Their psychological analysis had no practical effect. At this time, Min Soo could only ask Tae-gu to share the case documents with her. Then, Min Soo would not need to bother the criminal police team anymore. But Tae-gu did not want to waste time with the two people, so she ordered the guests to leave. The two people had to find another way to collect information about the case. Next, Min Soo went to an old colleague who worked in the forensic department. Min Soo asked her colleague to take pictures of all the documents about the body at the scene. Min Soo then sent the clues of the case to Hayong. Meanwhile, Hayong was going to meet the murderer who dismembered the body. The criminal's mood had changed miraculously. At first, the criminal was still hot-tempered and hostile, but this time he seemed a little interested. The criminal knew that Hayong was very interested in his psychology. At the same time, he also became interested in Hayong. The criminal stared at Hayong's cold eyes. The criminal said that he could feel that the distance between Hayong and the perverted killer was very fragile. If Hayong was not careful, he would turn into a scary monster. This conversation still did not bring Hayong any useful clues. After Hayong returned to the office, he and his colleagues started working overtime. They They analyzed the evidence that Min-soo had stolen from the forensic department. In the autopsy report, the victim's body was cut up very carefully. If the murderer could handle the body so precisely and decisively, he must be a very calm person. He could not be mentally ill. Moreover, the murderer was extremely good at cutting. At this time, Woo-do suggested that the murderer might be an employee of the livestock industry, so Min-soo immediately added this possibility to the board. The forensic report also clearly stated that the body was wrapped in 2 layers of black plastic bags. This feature is similar to the way the butchers do it. After the butchers finish cutting the meat for the customers, they also put it in 2 layers of plastic bags. Therefore, the possibility that the butchers were the murderers was also written on the board. At the same time, in addition to Hayong's team, the criminal investigation team was also working overtime. Late at night, when Tae-gu went out for some fresh air, she heard Hayong and Min-soo discussing with their superiors that they wanted to change the direction of the investigation to the nearby meat shops. Because Tae-gu heard this opinion, the next day, when she went to investigate, she deliberately checked all the meat shops. The direction of the investigation was still focused on people with mental illness. Hayong saw that Tae-gu was still persistently pursuing that wrong direction, which made him extremely worried. After that, Hayong went to see Tae-gu privately. Hayong hoped that she could accept his opinion. All Hayong did was to help the criminal investigation team solve the case soon. However, Tae-gu sarcastically said that the nature of the criminal investigation team and the criminal behavior analysis team were very different, because the criminal behavior analysis team only relied on baseless speculations. The conversation thus ended unhappily. Very quickly, more than 20 days had passed since the case. However, the investigation process still did not make any progress. This put Tae-gu under a lot of pressure. That day, the forensic team called to inform that they found a trace on the girl's back that looked like she had been pressed against a refrigerator tray. This was an extremely clear clue. Tae-gu was also extremely surprised by this. However, this evidence was discovered by Min-soo first. When the superiors saw that Min-soo's team had found this very small evidence, they began to persuade Tae-gu to let Min-soo's team investigate together. After Tae-gu listened to the sincere advice from her superiors, she agreed, although she still did not want to cooperate with them. After that, the criminal investigation team began to investigate refrigerator stores. They wanted to find a refrigerator that matched the evidence they had obtained. Hayong and Min-soo went to find the owner of the waste factory, someone with rich experience. Through the information provided by the boss, they knew that this type of refrigerator had been around for a long time. When Min-soo informed Tae-gu of this news, her side received news that the police had discovered a new body part. This time, the location where the body was discovered was in a motel. The motel owner discovered that the drain in a room was clogged, so she scooped up the items inside to examine. Unexpectedly, it turned out to be a human body part. The police immediately went to the room to check. Here, they found the room extremely clean and tidy. Obviously, the murderer did not sleep here. When Min-soo lifted the bed sheet, he discovered a neatly folded set of girls' clothes. In order to quickly solve the case, Hayong offered to provide Tae-gu and his superiors with a copy of the criminal records. Hayong hoped that this carefully analyzed document could change the police's impression of Hayong's group. Sure enough, this criminal record convinced the superiors, and Hayong also had the opportunity to speak. Hayong said that the perpetrator was a middle-aged man who used to live near the butcher shop. He chose to attack the girl due to his lack of character. He was not confident in front of adult women. Therefore, it was very likely that the perpetrator had a criminal record. After discussion, the superiors decided to use a covert investigation method to investigate. They printed out a list of all the people who met the conditions in the vicinity. Then, the police went to ask each house. However, they still did not get anything. The police thought that the perpetrator was probably an employee who had not registered his household here. After changing the direction of the investigation, the police quickly targeted a person. Based on the clues, Hayong found a house in the woods in the suburbs. Hayong's intuition told him that the person here was the perpetrator. Tae-gu also quickly ran over, and the two of them entered the house. They found the inside was clean and tidy. This place looked like a motel crime scene. Hayong noticed the old-fashioned refrigerator in the corner. It also had a compartment that matched the type the police had been looking for before. More importantly, Hayong discovered the girl's hair clip in the backpack under the refrigerator. There was no doubt that this was the murderer's house. Hayong and the criminal police sat in the car waiting for the homeowner to return. Not long after, the sound of a cat meowing rang out in the night. Hayong got out of the car and took out the cat food from the bag. Then he sat down to feed it. This warm action surprised Tae-gu because she always thought Hayong was cold and heartless. Hayong said he didn't like animals. He just felt that these creatures didn't know how to lie. No matter matter if they were hungry or in pain, they could only wait for people to realize their suffering. Hayong felt that being able to see the thoughts of animals and help in time was a good thing. The three people waited by the house until the next day, but they still did not see the landlord appear. When the sky was light, the landlord came. After she knew the identities of the three people, she immediately provided them with important evidence. This tenant had once brought a little girl home. The little girl's physical characteristics were extremely similar to the victims. Based on the landlord's words, the criminal force blocked off the area around the house. They conducted a large-scale search for the remaining body. After a day and a night of tireless efforts, they found 8 of the little girl's fingers in the mud and sewer, but the remaining 2 fingers were still missing. After that, the police could only rest and wait until the next day to continue searching. After Min-soo got off work, he called his wife, whom he hadn't seen for a long time. Min-soo missed his children very much at this time, but Min-soo still hadn't rested, so he couldn't visit them. Min-soo could only look at photos to ease his longing. Unlike Min-soo's sensitivity, Hayong and Tae-gu only focused on thinking about the case. Since the body was discovered, the police had speculated that the murderer would throw the body in different places at different intervals. Up to now, the police still hadn't found the girl's last 2 fingers. Perhaps the murderer would continue to appear to throw them away. The next day, the police found out information about Choi-ju's identity. He was a middle-aged man with a criminal record. This information completely matched Hayong's previous profile. Choi-ju had just moved house recently, so he had dropped out of the search list. The forensics department also found fingerprints of Choi-ju and the girl in the room. Basically, the police were sure that Choi-ju was the culprit. But the important thing now was to find his hiding place. Very quickly, the police investigated a meat shop. Choi-ju was the nephew of the owner here, and he was asked by the owner to look after the shop for a while. However, Choi-ju left without notice. He also received his salary through checks, not cash. With this clear clue, the criminal investigation team went to ask around the surrounding shops. A convenience store employee remembered that he had received a check some time ago. Tae-gu immediately requested to extract the camera. While searching for evidence, the forensics team also discovered something strange in Choi-gu's house. Everywhere in the house, they found only 3 fingerprints on objects. This trace was like he had bent his hand to take something. Hayong thought that Choi-ju might have lost 2 fingers, or he was used to taking things that way. Hayong remembered that the red-hatted thief had told him that no matter how well a perverted killer hid, he would still show his habits. When the criminal investigation team watched the video recorded by the convenience store camera, they saw a customer enter the store. When the customer took the change, he raised his other hand, which was in his pocket. His middle finger and ring finger were both missing a joint. The store employee immediately reported to Tae-gu. Then she and the police rushed out to chase Choi-ju. Finally, they caught Choi-ju in a small alley. When the criminal investigation team sent the information that Choi-ju had been caught to the headquarters, everyone was happy. This disgusting case was finally over. Next, the police would take the perpetrator in for questioning. Choi-ju confessed that he had initially kidnapped the girl just to demand ransom, but because the girl was so scared, she forgot her home phone number. That's why Choi-ju acted so cruelly. Next, Hayong and Min-soo also asked for a chance to interrogate. Today, they and the criminal investigation team talked to Choi-ju. Although after Choi-ju was arrested, he cooperated very much in confessing to the police. Choi-ju often bowed his head and answered in an unconfident tone, but Hayong knew that the 2 fingers of the girl that were kept were somehow related to his 2 broken fingers. Perhaps this was the reason why Choi-ju committed the crime. Hayong asked why his fingers were broken. Choi-ju honestly answered that while he was working at the construction site, he unfortunately fell and broke his arm. But because he couldn't find the missing finger, he lost the best chance to reattach the bone. Hayong also felt sorry for Choi-ju. Perhaps Choi-ju was extremely self-conscious after that accident, because Choi-ju was not only considered a monster by outsiders, but he was also not respected by women. Speaking of this, Choi-ju unconsciously glanced at Tae-gu beside him. Then Tae-gu understood and left the interrogation room. Only Hayong, Min-soo and Choi-ju were left in the room. Because Choi-ju did not answer, Hayong and Min-soo continued to talk. The girl would not pay attention to Choi-ju's fingers, so did he destroy her 2 fingers. But Choi-ju did not answer, just stared at Hayong's cold eyes. After the interrogation ended, Choi-ju was handed over to the police. The bus carrying Choi-ju was thrown eggs by angry people all along the way. However, Choi-ju remained extremely calm and had no regrets at all. After her case was solved, 3 people in Min-soo's group went to a bar to celebrate. Finally, Min-soo was able to use alcohol to relieve the anger in her heart. Min-soo scolded Choi-ju for not being worthy of being human. Hayong also did not feel better. He bought a bouquet of white chrysanthemums and placed it where the girl's body was found. That night, Min-soo got drunk at the bar and staggered home. Min-soo walked away feeling dissatisfied and regretful that the police could not protect the girl. After that, Min-soo angrily threw away her employee card. At this time, a young man behind her quietly walked over. He picked up the employee card and put it in his pocket. The next day when Hayong went to work, he saw a comment about the girl's case online. The signature at the bottom of the post looked very familiar. Hayong remembered that this morning he had driven his car and hit the back of another car. The car owner was a young girl. In order to facilitate compensation and repairs, the girl gave Hayong a business card. The name on the business card is Yoonji, the author of this article. Because this time, Min-soo's group has made many achievements in her case, Min-soo asked her superiors to provide more office equipment such as air conditioning, desks, and heaters. However, when the head of the department reported Min-soo's request, this request was rejected. The director thought that he did not need to spend money on the criminal behavior analysis team because he still did not take Min-soo's team too seriously. In the entire justice system, it seems that only Min-soo and Hayong believe that criminal behavior analysis is closely related to cases in society. For example, in Choi-ju's case, his sentence is not long away. In the future, Choi-ju still has a chance to return to society, but it is unknown whether Choi-ju can be educated in prison. Can just detaining Choi-ju help him realize his crimes? Hayong and Min-soo want to go to prison to meet Choi-ju again. They want to add information to their behavioral analysis file. Next, the two prepare to analyze Dae-sung, the perpetrator in the famous serial murder case. This is a serial murder case of women. It makes anyone who hears it feel scared. Through the wounds on the body, the police not only recognize the perpetrator's method of committing the crime, but they can also feel the joy he had while committing the crime. The serial killer, Dae-sung, is an extreme example. It seems that this highly intelligent murderer was born just to kill people. When night fell, a young man picked up Min-soo's employee card. He replaced his photo with Min-soo's. Then, he took advantage of it to approach a girl who was going home alone. It turned out that he was the serial killer, Dae-sung. That day, Min-soo and Hayong went to the prison to meet Choi-ju. Because after work, Min-soo had to attend his cousin's wedding, so he was already wearing a suit. Unexpectedly, Choi-ju mistakenly thought that Min-soo intentionally dressed seriously because he met him, so he developed a feeling of closeness with Min-soo. Sitting in front of the camera, Hayong mentioned that he had been to Choi-ju's house. Hayong discovered that Choi-ju arranged the house extremely carefully. He was like a person with a cleanliness obsession. Choi-ju immediately admitted this. At the same time, he also criticized the living conditions in prison. Hearing this, Hayong thought that perhaps Choi-ju killed the girl not because of the desire to kill, but because of the twisted mentality caused by the cleanliness obsession. But Choi-ju only said that because the girl was too unlucky, she should not have appeared in the park that day. If Choi-ju had not seen her, she would not have died. Choi-ju's answer left Hayong and Min-soo speechless. Next, Min-soo asked about Choi-ju's background. Choi-ju also honestly said that he dropped out of school to work since he was young. Min-soo heard that and also said that his family was very poor when he was young. Choi-ju asked Min-soo if he had dropped out of school since elementary school like Choi-ju. However, Min-soo denied it, which caused Choi-ju's hope to be extinguished. Perhaps the murderer also longed for a kindred spirit and to be understood. But even so, Hayong and Min-soo's exploration of the hearts of the villains was still a long-term burden. Until now, they only understood the surface of the villains' souls, but the two of them had never truly understood them. Time passed quickly. Hayong and Min-soo were still interested in major cases. They also relied on their own ways to support solving the cases. However, their group still had no chance to shine. The group could only barely maintain thanks to Min-soo's relationship. 3 years later, a typhoon swept through Korea. A man came home to find his wife tragically dead in the house. The man holding the hammer standing next to him was none other than Dae-sung, who had picked up Min-soo's work card. Dae-sung then hit the man on the head with the hammer. That day, Police Chief Bong-sik was transferred to the police station. When Tae-gu heard the news, he was not very happy. It seemed that she had some conflicts with Bong-sik. There were also rumors in the police community that Hayong had worked with Bong-sik. Moreover, Hayong had betrayed Bong-sik, but Tae-gu knew that these rumors were not true. Sure enough, when Bong-sik had just taken office, he went to the criminal psychology research group to ask about Hayong's whereabouts. At this time, only Woo-do was in the office. After Bong-sik heard Woo-do say that Hayong had gone out, Bong-sik had no intention of leaving and sat down. Bong-sik flipped through the documents on Hayong's desk. Bong Sik's attitude was very impolite and arrogant. At this moment, Hayong returned to the office. When the two saw each other, the atmosphere immediately became tense. Bong Sik spoke with an extremely contemptuous tone towards Hayong. Bong Sik not only satirized Hayong's old habits, but Bong Sik also ridiculed the group's work. After showing his power, Bong Sik held a cigarette in his mouth and happily left. On this side, Taegu opened the drawer and took out a photo of herself and Bong Sik. When Taegu looked at her unhappy expression in the photo, she immediately remembered that night. When Taegu was on a wanted mission, she accidentally encountered the murderer. Because Taegu had no one to support her, she had no choice but to act alone. However, due to her lack of experience, she was followed by the murderer. He also threatened Taegu with a knife. Luckily, Hayong appeared at the crucial moment. Hayong attacked from behind and subdued the perpetrator. Seeing that, Taegu immediately handcuffed the criminal. Hayong quietly left. Thanks to catching the criminal, Taegu received praise. After the award ceremony, Bong Sik stepped forward to take a photo with Taegu. Bong Sik laughed at Taegu for being greedy for fame, so she took Hayong's credit for herself. Then, a call brought Taegu back to reality. The employee reported that her superiors needed to find her. Recently, a case had occurred in the wealthy Gangnam area. However, because Bong Sik had just taken office, he had not yet grasped the situation. Because the superiors could not contact Bong Sik, they had to call Taegu. They handed this case over to her. Because the victim couple's social status was very special, and they even had close relations with high-ranking officials at the Gangnam police station, the case could only be sent here to avoid suspicion. After Taegu received the case documents, she immediately contacted the police in Gangnam. After Taegu led her subordinates to the victim's house, she checked the scene. She found that there were no signs of a struggle at the scene, and no money had been taken. The Gangnam police thought that it was possible that this was a case of revenge. However, according to rumors, the victim couple were both good people. No one had ever heard of the victim having any enemies. Therefore, Taegu speculated that this was a murder with cruel methods, and it was very possible that the murderer was an acquaintance of the victim. Taegu immediately asked her subordinates to make a list of acquaintances living nearby. At the same time, they also paid attention to see if anyone had a history of mental illness. Before Taegu arrived, reporter Yoonji was already waiting at the victim's house. Yoonji pestered the Gangnam police to get some news, but Yoonji unexpectedly met Taegu. Yoonji was wondering why Taegu was involved in the Gangnam case when the editor-in-chief called to inform her that many people had revealed the victim's identity online. The editor-in-chief blamed Yoonji for missing the opportunity to report the first hot news. The person who secretly leaked the news was Bong Sik. After Bong Sik received the documents, he immediately made the content public to reporter Kim. After that, reporter Kim's article caused a stir in public opinion because the victim was a famous university professor. The news attracted a lot of attention from many people. This brought great pressure from the police. Although the entire police department was in chaos, Minsu's group was still immersed in their research. Hayong and Minsu were teaching Wudo. Serial killers usually attack animals first, and only when they are not satisfied will they turn to humans. Every time a killer kills a person, he goes through a period of satisfaction and enjoyment. This is called the criminal's resting period. When this feeling of satisfaction gradually fades, the killer will develop the desire to kill again, and he will start looking for the next victim. These arguments make Wudo exclaim, "How scary." Minsu comforts him that in Korea, there has not yet been a serial killer case with a fixed resting period. At this time in a small dark room, Daesung bought a lot of newspapers. The pages of the newspapers were all news related to the case, and the TV next to him also broadcast similar information. Daesung seemed to be immersed in the shock caused by the case. This behavior is very consistent with the criminal's resting period that Hayong mentioned. That night, after examining the victim's body, Taegu immediately returned to the police station to work overtime. After seeing the documents of this case, Hayong did not leave work but stayed to analyze the psychology and motive of the murderer. However, the police currently have too little evidence, so Hayong still cannot come to an accurate conclusion. Therefore, Taegu and Hayong do not have an answer for this matter. That night, the murderer continued to act. He rang the doorbell of another villa, but after the murderer heard the man's voice, he quickly gave up. However, he still did not give up on his prey. The next day, when the man drove away, the murderer immediately put on gloves, picked up the weapon and sneaked into the house. Then another murder occurred. The police immediately sent someone to the scene. After the media heard the news, they also rushed to the scene to report. The media also linked this case with the previous murder case of the professor couple. If these two cases were related, this would be a serial murder case. The police quickly discovered the connection between the two cases. That is, the murderer did not take any money and and he used a hammer to hit the victim's head. In addition, the forensic team also had a surprising discovery. In a burglary case that happened in another area not long ago, the forensic team discovered footprints left by the murderer. These footprints were completely identical to the footprints in the case in Gangnam. The police immediately connected the evidence together. After Hayong knew of these clues, he hurried to the scene of the second murder. When Hayong arrived, he was stopped by Bong-sik. However, Hayong did not pay any attention to Bong-sik. Hayong used force to push Bong-sik away and went into the house. Next, Hayong checked around the room and observed every detail. At this time, Min-soo called Hayong. Min-soo said that the special nature of this series of murders was very consistent with a serial murder case with arrest period. Hayong left the victim's house in a daze. Hayong knew that if he did not quickly find the pattern of the murderer, more people would die. At this time, the murderer was mingling in the crowd. He was satisfied with his work. The progress of the investigation of these 3 consecutive murders was extremely slow. In order to increase attention, the media and public opinion constantly discussed these 3 cases that brought enormous pressure to the police department. At this crucial moment, Bong-sik reported to his superiors that Hayong had been going to the victim's house almost every day. The existence of the criminal behavior analysis team was already controversial, and they were also ridiculed within the police. Therefore, many people felt dissatisfied with Hayong's arbitrarily investigating the case. After Bong-sik brought up this issue, Taegu unexpectedly agreed with him. When the two of them went to their superior's office, they wanted to advise Hayong to withdraw from the investigation. At this moment, all the police officers received a notice that the latest victim had appeared. Hayong did not receive the notice because he was going to the car to get his things. However, when Hayong arrived at the parking lot, he found that the surroundings were empty. Hayong immediately realized that the serial murder case had taken a new turn. Afterwards, Hayong and Min-soo also rushed to the crime scene. This time, the details of the case were somewhat different. That is, after the murderer killed someone, he also intended to burn the house. Bong-sik did not care about collecting evidence, but he arbitrarily rushed into the crime scene and stepped on all the evidence. This made the evidence collectors extremely helpless. Min-soo heard the news and wanted to enter the crime scene, but everyone stopped him. The superior told Min-soo that from now on, he and Hayong were not allowed to arbitrarily enter the crime scene anymore. If the superior had documents, he would provide them to the group. With no other choice, Min-soo could only stand there frozen. Since Hayong arrived, he did not say anything. Hayong also did not look at the dead person in the house, but he kept observing the crowd. After the superior left, Hayong asked Taegu about information related to the dead person. Apart from arson, the other methods of committing the crime were the same as before. But what made Hayong ponder was the cycle of the murderer's crimes. Because the interval between previous cases had shortened, the time from 12 days had decreased to 6 days. This proved that the murderer was becoming more and more reckless and confident. However, this time the crime lasted for a month. Perhaps this was also a kind of murder pattern of the murderer. Afterwards, the police station hastily held a press conference, but the director did not reveal any valuable clues. Although the cases had clearly shown the nature of serial murder, the director still wanted to control the panic in society, so he did not reveal any more information. However, the reporters were not people who were easily fooled. Many media outlets had identified this as a serial murder case. Although Min-soo and Hayong were forbidden from entering the scene, Min-soo still used her connections to enter the scene. Min-soo and Hayong secretly changed into the clothes of the evidence collectors and mixed in. This time, the murderer not only set fire, but also touched the dead man's safe. He smashed the cross on the wall. The dead man's face was beaten by many weapons until it was deformed into a triangle. Hayong was sure that the murderer's purpose was not money. What kind of person was he that he hated the rich so much? On this side, Taegu also found a clue. This time, after the murderer committed the crime, he took a black coat out of the victim's house. Taegu quickly found a location with a camera along the road. Taegu asked the staff there to extract the video recording. Taegu wanted to find the man wearing a black coat, hiking shoes, and a large bag. Because the police station's investigation progress was too slow, Bong-sik had no information to reveal to reporter Kim. In order to have a new article, Bong-sik tried to discover an important point. That is, the pronunciation of the area where the deceased lived is the same. Bong-sik immediately reported this clue to the department head. On this side, Hayong and Min-soo also knew that the murderer had taken the coat. Min-soo guessed that because the temperature dropped, the murderer conveniently took the coat with him when leaving to keep warm. But Hayong thought that he wanted to cover up the blood stains on his body. At this time, Min-soo received a text message from an acquaintance. That person said that he had found a pair of hiking shoes of the same type as the murderer's shoes. Through checking the camera, Taegu also got the result. There was a camera that recorded the image of the murderer. Although it was only a silhouette, after Hayong thought for a long time, he entered the conference room. Hayong suggested that the police make public the image of this silhouette. They should conduct a nationwide search. However, Hayong's opinion was opposed by Taegu. If he only relied on such a vague back, most of the reports received would be useless. This not only wasted time, but also led to the wrong direction of solving the case. Hayong understood this. Hayong guessed that the length of the break in the latest case was related to the level of media attention. In the previous case, public opinion had not yet been stirred up, so the murderer could operate at his own pace. But after the recent case, the media rushed to report the news. That made the murderer hesitate a bit, so he extended the break. But in the end, the murderer still decided to kill. This proved that the pleasure in his heart had overcome his fear. The murderer would definitely continue to commit crimes. Therefore, the police had to issue a wanted notice to threaten the murderer, because only then would he be afraid and stop committing crimes. Hayong's words were very reasonable, so all the superiors in the police could not refute them. Only Bong-sik still had prejudice against Hayong, so he made a scene like a clown. Bong-sik also insulted Taegu because she agreed with Hayong's thoughts. As a result, Bong-sik received a slap from Taegu. After Hayong made the suggestion, he couldn't help but doubt himself whether he did the right thing or not. Although the wanted poster could temporarily stop the murderer from taking action, if the murderer escaped, it would be even more difficult for the police to find him. This could also be considered a double-edged sword. The next morning, wanted posters were posted everywhere in the city. The phones in the police station kept ringing. The police spent a lot of time listening to the people's complaints. This action became a target for the media. People were discussing the murderer's back and shoe prints. Although the police did not expect anything from this noise, Hayong achieved his goal. The hot news made the murderer turn off the TV. He was a little scared now. He was no longer immersed in the fruits of his crime like before. That day, the chief picked up the daily newspaper. He discovered a prominent headline about the crime areas. These areas had similar pronunciations. This had been mentioned by Bong-sik. Since no one in the police station knew about this, except Bong-sik, it was definitely Bong-sik who leaked this information to the reporter. The chief felt extremely disappointed with Bong-sik. In fact, everyone thought that this pronunciation was too stupid. It could only be said that reporter Kim wanted new information, so he completely abandoned his professional principles. That night, reporter Yoonji was also writing an article related to the wanted person, but she thought for a long time and did not know where to start. Up to now, the police are using the media to threaten the murderer. At the same time, they are still continuing the investigation. Hayong is not idle either. He still goes to investigate at the homes of the deceased every day. Hayong created a part of the crime map which simulates the murderer's trajectory. After a period of time, the pressure created by the police and the media could no longer control the murderer's impulse to kill. He went to the library to find books related to anatomy. He wanted to find a new method to avoid being detected. The wanted notice had been made public for a month, but the police still could not collect any clues. Meanwhile, the pressure from the media was increasing. Hayong also gave part of the analysis file related to the murderer. Hayong believes that the murderer is a criminal with intelligence and ability. He understands his plan to catch people very well. Therefore, the police can eliminate those with mental problems. Based on the murderer's method of arrest, the murderer was an aggressive person. However, this profile was still very vague. Taegu could not use this evidence to mobilize the police to search. Several months had passed, but the investigation was still at a standstill. People had begun to doubt the police's abilities. Finally, the murderer appeared. After several months of studying anatomy, he seemed to have become much more sophisticated. The murderer went to the hospital to have a full-body X-ray. He pasted pieces of wood to form body parts on the wall. After that, the murderer was in a hurry to start hunting. He was eager to show off his new method. Because the method of searching did not bring any results, the department head began to blame Minsu's group. He believed that it was because of their wrong decision that the police's reputation in the eyes of the people was lowered. Therefore, the department head once again asked Hayong and Minsu not to investigate the scene anymore. The two of them should stay in the office to conduct the analysis. The next day, Hayong went to the dead man's house again. Taegu also went there with him. She understood the difficult situation of everyone now, but Taegu still did not give up the investigation. She also wanted to prove that the police force she led was not incompetent. Hayong frowned. He was currently concerned about another problem. 4 months had passed without any news of the murderer. Perhaps the murderer had changed his method of committing the crime. If the truth was like that, then the impression of the previous cases had had become a protective cage for the murderer. In the dark night, a middle-aged man was sharpening the knife in his hand. Then he followed a girl and entered the building. He stabbed her hard in the stomach. Finally, he quickly disappeared into the night. Early the next morning, the man leisurely walked out of the subway station. He conveniently took the milk and newspaper from someone else's door. After the man returned home, he happily put the handkerchief and murder weapon in the drawer. On this side, Hayong looked at the case summary reports every day. Hayong was trying to find traces of the serial killer, but he still couldn't find any clues. Woo-do prayed silently in his heart, hoping that this evil person could really stop. Today, a few policemen came to Min-soo's group. They wanted to learn criminal psychology from Hayong and Min-soo. Hayong told them that famous serial killers at home and abroad all had something in common, which was that their family circumstances when they were young were not good. So these people often liked to set fires and kill people. Their purpose in harming others was to feel happy from it. In order to prolong this satisfaction and joy, the murderer committed serial murder. At the same time, based on the crime scene, the police can determine that the criminal has a chaotic mental state. The crime scene is extremely chaotic and the victim is also randomly selected. These are typical unsystematic cases. After the lecture ended, the department head also went to Min-soo's group. Although the department head criticized Hayong and Min-soo in all kinds of ways when he entered, the department head still encouraged this department. He hoped that their efforts could help the investigation. After Woo-do got off work, it rained heavily. Woo-do and Yoonji made an appointment to meet at a hot pot restaurant. While eating, Woo-do complained that Yoonji's article was too sharp, criticizing the failure to catch the criminal. This made the police extremely miserable. Woo-do said that Hayong and Min-soo had to work hard every day on this case, and Woo-do respected them very much. Under Yoonji's questioning, Woo-do told her Hayong's name. On a rainy night, a middle-aged man holding an umbrella walked around a small alley. He was looking for a target to attack. After a while of choosing, the man followed a girl holding a red umbrella. He went forward to attack the girl in a deserted place. At this moment, a car passed by, so the man was angry and had to flee the scene. When the man got home, he carefully put the handkerchief and weapon in the drawer. Then he recalled the moment he had harmed someone. Finally, he fell asleep happily. The next day, Min-soo was in the car reading the report of the new case. When Hayong saw that the description mentioned a knife, he immediately asked Woo-do to open the report to check if there was any case of harming people with a knife. Sure enough, Woo-do had found two previous cases that were extremely similar to this one. The victims were all young and single women, but because they didn't die, these two cases were classified as minor injury cases. At the same time, Taegu also paid attention to these cases of single women being harmed. Based on the chosen target and the method of committing the crime, she thought that this was also a serial injury case. Although the victims were all lucky to survive, they couldn't see the killer's face clearly. The victims only remembered that the killer's back was extremely short. It was this description that made Taegu extremely attentive, because the police were issuing a wanted notice, and the serial killer also had this characteristic. Hayong once said that after a criminal had been quiet for a while, there was a high chance that he would change his way of committing the crime. But he couldn't change his serial murder method. At present, the knife murder case seemed to be like a serial murder case. Perhaps the murderer was a criminal who had escaped before. Taegu didn't want to miss any clues. Instead of sitting still and doing nothing, she decided to take the initiative to investigate. Elsewhere, Hayong and Min-soo were following these cases, so they went to the local police station where the attempted murders took place. Here, the two of them learned the details of the three cases. They even visited the witnesses. The witnesses said the criminal was small, wore old tracksuits, and was bald. After thinking, Hayong thought that the murderer this time was not a previous criminal, because when comparing the two, the actions of the knife-wielding killer still seemed awkward, but the previous criminal could rush into a house without making a sound. So why is he now risking his life to follow the victim? And the victim this time did not die. This does not mean that the murderer's purpose was only to cause injury, but he may have failed to kill the target. So Hayong determined that there were currently two serial killers appearing in Korea. Hayong's worries were not wrong. The middle-aged man knew that the female student he attacked 3 times did not die, so he found a longer knife. While he was imagining killing, his face was filled with excitement and joy. After Hayong confirmed the second serial killer, he reported it to the department head. But after the department head looked at Hayong's documents, he called Taegu over because she and Hayong were both interested in a case. Therefore, everyone sat together and gave their opinions. As soon as Hayong spoke, he denied Taegu's thoughts. Woo-do affirmed that the perpetrator of the 2 cases was not the same person. After Taegu heard this, he was quite disappointed. However, the nature of these 2 cases cases was very serious. The knife-wielding killer realized that the weapon he used could not kill people, so he would definitely improve his method of committing the crime. Before the murderer commits a murder, the police must catch him. The first step in finding a criminal is to draw a portrait of the criminal, since the victims cannot remember what the criminal looks like. Hayong suggested that the police use hypnosis. This method can help the victims remember more details. Sure enough, after the victims were hypnotized, they were able to perfect the criminal's appearance. Hayong also received a portrait of the knife-wielding killer. Late at night, Hayong and Taegu's group went to the alley where the murder took place. They simulated the situation where the knife-wielding killer committed the crime. Obviously, he followed the victim all the way. But why were the victims stabbed in the stomach? Hayong and the police worked together to recreate the situation at that time. There was only one possibility that could happen. That is, after the criminal controlled the victim, he deliberately turned her around and attacked her head-on. Then, everyone divided into two groups. They went to the place where the victim was harmed to look for clues. However, at this time, the knife-wielding killer was sitting in the park. He attentively watched a young girl passing by. He immediately followed the girl. He pulled out a sharp, long knife that had been prepared in advance to attack. After that, the killer quickly left the scene. One day, the knife-wielding killer was watching TV at home. After he knew that the girl had died, he immediately smiled with satisfaction. Realizing that the knife-wielding killer's tricks had improved, Hayong immediately held a meeting in the police station. Here, Hayong raised opinions related to crime. Hayong listed the previous trauma case in the same murder case this time. Hayong said the police now needed to catch two serial killers. After everyone heard this, they complained and lamented one after another. The criminal in the previous case had already exhausted them. The other case had not yet been solved when a new serial killer appeared. But in order to prevent the next murder, the police department had to ask for help from the city police. They wanted to cooperate in capturing the knife-wielding killer. Once again, the people questioned the police's abilities. Reporters and the media would not let this opportunity pass. They took advantage of the panic of the people to put pressure on the police. Fortunately, this time the police had a clear portrait of the criminal. As long as the police did a good job of investigating, the criminal's actions would be limited. That night, a girl entered a residential room. The next day, neighbors heard the rumbling sound of a chainsaw operating inside. The Gangnam District serial killer was in the room. He was standing in front of the mirror with a bloody face. Minsu's work card had become one of his criminal tools. A few days later, the department head hurriedly called Minsu and informed him that the police had caught the serial killer who committed the crime in the Gangnam area. The other party had forged Minsu's information to cover up. After Hayong heard the news, he immediately drove back to the police station. This time, the serial killer was arrested for kidnapping prostitutes. The brothel owner discovered that the girls had disappeared one after another, so he decided to report it to the police. After the owner went to the police station to ask about the kidnapping of women, the serial killer gave inconsistent statements. At first, Dae-sung said that the victims had been killed, but later he said that the victims had been buried. Dae-sung's answers were clearly chaotic, so Hayong asked the police to investigate this matter first. Hayong wanted to know if Dae-sung had a history of mental illness. Dae-sung would be interrogated by Bong-sik. Bong-sik asked Dae-sung to write down the burial location and the number of victims. Dae-sung's attitude was very comfortable when facing the police. He even looked down on them. This made Bong-sik and his superiors very angry. In the end, Dae-sung confessed to the crimes he had committed, but because there were too many deaths, the police decided to keep it a secret. They searched for the burial location of the victims first. Meanwhile, Yoonji wanted to get hot news, so she asked for Woo-do's connections. Later, Yoonji went to the criminal psychology team to get inside information. On this side, the interrogation was only halfway through when Dae-sung suddenly fell to the ground. He convulsed and had an epileptic seizure. Hayong quickly gave him first aid. Then, Dae-sung returned to normal. If the procedure was correct, he should have been taken to determine the victim's location. However, when Bong-sik led Dae-sung out of the police station, he used the excuse of going to the bathroom and sneaked up on Bong-sik. He escaped from the police station. The police immediately mobilized people to search for Dae-sung's whereabouts. Taegu chased him to the end of the alley, but because of her carelessness, she was sneaked up on by him. Taegu was injured and fell to the ground. When Dae-sung was about to kill her, Hayong ran over and joined the fight with him. However, Hayong could not defeat her opponent. When Hayong was pressed against the wall, Taegu endured the pain and stood up again. In the end, she and Hayong cooperated to capture Dae-sung. At this time, Yoonji was throwing a tantrum in Minsu's group's office. She wanted to get inside information from Woo-do, but Woo-do was determined not to reveal anything. At this this time, it was very noisy outside the police station. Wu Do knew that the murderer had been caught, so he immediately went out. Then he went into the police station lobby with Hayong. Yoonji was stopped outside. Taegu's injury made all the police hate Dae-sung. The superior wanted to go to interrogate Bong-sik instead, but Hayong stopped him. Hayong had observed the interrogation process before. Hayong realized that Dae-sung was an extremely arrogant person. Dae-sung thought that he could control every situation. If the superior contacted Dae-sung, Dae-sung's arrogance would increase even more. And if his subordinates interrogated him, the interrogator would not receive an answer from Dae-sung. Therefore, the superior decided to let the police enter the interrogation room first. The truth was just as Hayong said. Dae-sung was extremely arrogant. He had only said a few words when he declared that he could not talk to a low-ranking police officers. Dae-sung asked to speak to his superiors. The director had no choice but to step forward. The current situation did not allow Dae-sung to delay. Before the director entered the interrogation room, Hayong had already transferred most of the documents from the office. Hayong reminded the director that he had to overwhelm Dae-sung's momentum. Occasionally, he had to look at the documents and hinted to him that the police had obtained a lot of evidence. The director understood after hearing this. When the director entered the interrogation room, he overwhelmed Dae-sung's arrogance with his momentum. When Dae-sung saw a pile of criminal documents and his arrest warrant, he began to panic. Later, according to the address Dae-sung had given, the police had also dug up 18 sets of skeletons behind the mountain. This horrifying scene shocked all the police. Even Hayong, who had never shown his emotions, was so angry that he clenched his fists. Only Dae-sung looked at everything around him indifferently. He considered those lives as nothing but trash. The director immediately held a press conference. Here, the director announced the news and reported on Dae-sung's case. Solving such a series of murders was a good thing. However, the media would not miss this opportunity to exploit the topic. They began to connect Dae-sung with unsolved cases. Unsolved cases were a shame for the police. Now that the media was bringing up the old story, people were even more skeptical about the police's abilities. Therefore, the director ordered the director to think of a way to make Dae-sung admit to the remaining cases, because only then would the burning fire of public opinion be temporarily extinguished. The police began to review the unsolved cases. They took turns entering the interrogation room to question Dae-sung. Because Dae-sung was so arrogant, he admitted to all the cases. Even if they were unsolved cases, he confessed that he was the one who did it. Among those cases was the case of the knife killer who had repeatedly murdered women not long ago. At this time, the knife killer was actually watching TV at home. When he discovered that the police had given his great achievements to someone else, he immediately showed an angry expression. Because Dae-sung's personality often changed, the entire police department was worried and careful during the interrogation. They were afraid that he would suddenly change his testimony to ensure his safety. After Dae-sung admitted to most of the crimes, the chief of police decided not to continue questioning him. He sent Dae-sung to the procuratorate. However, for a criminal psychologist like Hayong, although Dae-sung is very cruel, he is a deadly temptation for Hayong. Hayong really wants to understand everything about Dae-sung. So the next day, Hayong returned to the mountain where the remains were excavated. At this time, Hayong temporarily suppressed his anger. He considered himself the culprit. The next day, Hayong and Min-soo went to the detention center. As usual, cameras were installed to monitor Dae-sung. When Dae-sung knew that Hayong came to learn about his criminal psychology, Dae-sung immediately expressed understanding, because Dae-sung also knew a little about criminal psychologists. Moreover, Dae-sung also wanted to understand himself. Why did he want to kill others? Dae-sung cooperated very obediently. He answered Hayong and Min-soo's questions. When they asked about each specific case, Dae-sung had a clear understanding, including the reason why he made his own weapons, the reason why he set fire, and the reason why he was silent for a while before reappearing. Dae-sung's thoughts were clear and logical. He seemed like a very elite person with a high IQ. The only thing that was different from normal people was his antisocial views. After Dae-sung confessed, he proudly asked, "This must be the first time you've met a criminal like me." Dae-sung was clearly aware that he was special, so Hayong and Min-soo came to the detention center to find him. However, Hayong coldly replied that Dae-sung thought so himself and that Hayong had no interest in him. After Dae-sung heard this answer, he clearly showed his dissatisfaction. When Hayong and Min-soo arrived at the detention center, they agreed on how to interrogate Dae-sung. Because Dae-sung was a very confident person, they avoided saying words that would upset his pride. Min-soo noticed that Dae-sung's mood was a bit shaky, so he quickly asked other questions to divert Dae-sung's attention. Min-soo asked why he chose the victim's family in the Gangnam area. Dae-sung replied that he did not choose his targets targets based on any specific criteria. He just chose places close to home. Daesung wanted to make the victims feel that God could not save them from despair in times of danger. Instead of putting their faith in God, they should trust their lives to the killer. Daesung believed that the threshold between the bedroom and the bathroom was the boundary between yin and yang, so those who crossed that threshold could not survive. Daesung's answer left Minsu speechless. Minsu took a deep breath and continued to ask Daesung, "Is it difficult to kill someone and decompose the body?" Daesung seemed very excited after hearing the question. He began to recount how he performed these operations. First, Daesung turned on some upbeat music to lift his spirits. Then, he went to the bathroom, but suddenly Daesung fell silent. He felt that words could not accurately describe his skills in dismembering corpses, so Daesung asked for paper and pen and sketched out these operations. Although it was just a simple sketch, if others thought of it as being applied to the victim, it would still be frightening. Daesung said that in order to understand anatomy, he studied medicine diligently. He was very proud of his diligence because he only studied for a few months, but understood the structure of the human body better than anyone else. Finally, Hayong asked why Daesung carved the unclear symbols on the tree where the body was buried behind the mountain. Daesung replied that it was a symbol to mark the burial site to avoid the case of burying the body in the same place, because the body would be uncomfortable. Daesung thought he cared a lot about the body. Hayong took a few deep breaths and realized that Daesung, who was so cruel, would have no feelings. He only felt pleasure and comforted himself. At this time, the guard in the cell reminded them that it was time for lunch, but Hayong and Minsu did not want to eat. Minsu's reaction became even more intense. Minsu bluntly requested that Hayong alone interrogate Daesung in the afternoon. Minsu could not face him anymore, so in the afternoon, Hayong met Daesung again. This time, Hayong did not follow the plan he had outlined before. Hayong did not provoke Daesung's pride, but only asked to prove Daesung's weakness and evasion. Hayong's questions angered Daesung, but every time Daesung became agitated, Hayong quickly changed to another question. When Hayong asked him why he didn't continue to treat his epilepsy, Daesung sighed and said that he had been treated, but couldn't cure it completely. Life never let him do anything as he wanted, except for killing people. Hayong continued to ask Daesung if he still had many unfulfilled ideals. Daesung replied that when he was young, he wanted to draw pictures, but because his family was poor, he gave up his dream. After Daesung grew up, he wanted to become a police officer, but for him, the police were just a symbol of power, because Daesung had used a fake police card to rob, but at that time he also received money. In his perception, the whole world was controlled by power. Police officers could accept bribes to protect bad guys. Girls could live with strangers for money. Facing such a society full of evils, Daesung just wanted to punish those bad guys. He thought that killing had become his profession. When Daesung proudly told about his great mission, Hayong objected. Daesung had no right to punish others, so he did not need to use lies to cover up his evil actions. No matter how he rationalized his righteous actions, in the end, Daesung was just a miserable murderer. After the interrogation ended, it was already dark. Hayong slowly walked out of the cell. Hayong silently made a decision about Daesung's actions. He was just a despicable criminal. He used paranoia to turn his helplessness into anger, and Daesung was just trying to rationalize his crimes. The interrogation had exhausted Hayong both physically and mentally. Late at night, when Hayong and Minsu drank together, Hayong felt a vague sadness. For a long time, Hayong could not get rid of this negative energy. To see through the evil inside, Hayong had hurt her own soul. But perhaps because of this, Hayong became a criminal psychologist, and Hayong had to pay the price. After a night's rest, Hayong calmed down. Hayong continued to the scene of the first crime of the knife-wielding murderer. Hayong wanted to investigate more thoroughly. At this time, Taegu had been discharged from the hospital and returned to work. She also began to participate in this case. Tonight, the knife-wielding murderer committed the crime again, but his tricks had been upgraded. In addition to stalking, the killer also broke into the victim's house and set fire. After the killer who committed the serial murder was arrested, the Korean government realized that social crimes were on the rise. They took this serial murder case as a typical example. The government revised the comprehensive public security measures. All police officers had to study and do a good job of preparation. At the same time, police officers who made mistakes had to be punished. Bong-sik was transferred to another police station because he leaked information to reporters and caused misunderstandings among the public. The criminal behavior team played a great role in this case. This new method of investigating and planning crimes also gradually gained recognition from many people in the police force. One day, Yoonji finally convinced Woo-do. Yoonji had a chance to interview Min-soo and Hayong. The four sat across from each other and began the interview. In the office, office of the Criminal Behavior Analysis Team, Yoonji asked questions about the psychology of serial killers. In theory, each criminal has his own motive, such as love, money, or revenge. However, Daesung is not one of those common motives. He commits murder for personal pleasure. The perpetrator has this kind of mentality, mostly due to being ostracized by society and blind hatred for his own imperfection. His motive is not aimed at a specific individual, but at the whole world. A motiveless crime seems difficult to detect, but nothing can escape the eyes of a criminal psychologist. They will follow the traces that the criminal leaves at the scene. Then, they analyze and speculate on the motive and purpose of the perpetrator. If people say that a motiveless crime is a devil lurking in the crowd, then a criminal psychologist is the devil's mirror. Hayong used this interview to send a message to the knife-wielding killer. There is no perfect criminal in this world, and the police will definitely bring him to justice. Yoonji's article caused a strong stir. It made people in society aware of the new profession of criminal analyst. And everyone also knew the importance of this profession in the process of investigating the case. When the media realized that Yoonji's article was hot, they contacted Hayong and Min-soo. Any journalist would want to use this to gain traffic. However, both Min-soo and Hayong refused. They no longer wanted to participate in the interview. Reporter Kim, who had colluded with Bong-sik before, was also not at a disadvantage. In order to attract attention, Kim ignored professional ethics. Reporter Kim took Hayong's photo and published it in the newspaper. The next day, the knife-wielding killer saw an article with Hayong's photo at someone else's gate, so the Criminal Behavior Unit suddenly became the center of attention. Thanks to that, they were also respected by their superiors. That day, the superiors wanted to discuss with Min-soo about expanding the department when the police called. They had a new discovery related to the case of the knife-wielding killer. In a remote apartment, the victim was stabbed to death by a knife-wielding killer right at the door of the house. The victim's wound was in the abdomen. The killer had stabbed the person from behind with a knife. During the assault, he turned the victim around so that the victim could see him. Hayong and the police simulated the scene at that time. Through that, they speculated that perhaps the killer wanted to see the victim's expression of pain before dying. Taegu and the Criminal Behavior Unit started working overtime. To analyze this serial murder case, Hayong analyzed each of the victim's residences. Hayong discovered that those places were all near the subway. Moreover, the time the murderer usually commits an assault is in the middle of the night. He targets lonely women and attacks indiscriminately. In short, the knife-wielding killer that the police are looking for is a madman. He holds a weapon and wanders around the subway station. His method of committing crimes is constantly being upgraded. Currently, the police still cannot identify this knife-wielding killer. This conclusion makes everyone sigh in frustration. At this time, thunder suddenly sounded outside. Rain at night is an easy time to commit a crime. Sure enough, the knife-wielding killer got wet in the rain and began checking each residential building. Finally, he found an apartment with an unlocked window. The knife-wielding killer immediately climbed inside. This time, the tool he used was a pair of pliers. Previously, the murderer killed the victim with a fatal blow, but now he has changed his method to torment the victim. Hayong speculated that if this continued, the killer's behavior would most likely develop into home invasion. He might even kill someone and then set fire. Although there was no factual basis for concluding that the fire was arson, Hayong assumed that this was the connection of a serial killer. That day after work, the police station held a party, but Hayong was worried about the case, so he hurriedly left halfway and returned to the scene. Hayong simulated the actions of a killer holding a knife. Hayong did this to understand the killer's criminal psychology. Hayong repeated the crime scene over and over again, but the noise was too loud and affected the neighbors. The other party scolded Hayong and chased him away. After the party ended, Min-soo was a little worried about Hayong, so Min-soo decided to go to Hayong's house to visit. Hayong's state made Min-soo feel quite worried. Min-soo reminded Hayong that even if Hayong was interested in the case, he still needed to clearly separate his workspace and personal life. When Min-soo saw too many documents in Hayong's room, he said that when Hayong's mother saw these things, she would be very worried about her son. Besides work, Hayong should also feel other people's moods. Hayong. After listening, he thanked Min-soo for the reminder. The next day, Hayong took the subway. Hayong wanted to simulate the killer's route. Hayong completely immersed himself in his character. Hayong followed a single girl early in the morning. Even scaring her. But at this time, the killer's crime scene had expanded. He stole a subway car and went further to commit the crime. This time, he killed a delivery woman in broad daylight. Passers-by quickly discovered the victim and reported the case. After understanding the situation, the local police sent the suspect's profile to Hayong. The criminal's profile was identical to the knife-wielding killer. When Hayong realized that the knife-wielding killer's crime range had expanded, the police did not want to miss any suspicious cases. They began to check similar cases in all areas. The tense time began to drag on again. After a tiring night of work, everyone got up one by one to go eat. Only Hayong was still immersed in the case. Hayong had no appetite at all. At this time, Minsu saw a kitchen knife on Hayong's table, so Hayong hurriedly put it in the drawer. However, Minsu sternly asked Hayong to hand over the knife and put it in the safe, but Hayong did not put the knife away. Late at night, Hayong took the knife and appeared in the park, the place where the knife-wielding killer had passed. Because Hayong was so immersed in the world of the murderer, when he saw the girl, the scene of murder appeared in his mind. Hayong was extremely upset. Hayong tried to suppress his thoughts of wanting to kill. In the distance, a mysterious figure watches from the shadows. Hayong tightens her grip on the knife. Who is the hunter and who is the prey? We'll find out when the next curtain rises. Part 1 ends here. Thank you for watching. Goodbye and see you next time.